Greetings, seekers and visionaries. Welcome to the Joshuas, beyond the beloved community where we don't just dream of change, but we seek to embody it as well. I'm Dr. Dumas Harshaw Jr.
And I am Dr. Terrance Ruth. And together, we're journeying beyond the horizons of like yesterday's dream. And the dream that we're talking about in particular is Dr. Martin Luther King's dream to really forge the realities of tomorrow.
And today is important because we kick off a series that doesn't just reflect on the wisdom of the past, but uses that wisdom as a launch pad to innovate and to create a world even beyond what Dr. King envisioned.
So I'm excited. I get a chance to take this journey with Dr. Harshaw. And so I want you to settle in and open your hearts and minds, especially during this season, as we push the button on a transformative conversation. So again, I want to welcome y'all to this conversation, transformative conversation. I'm Terrance Ruth. I'm a student at heart, so I try to remain a student. And I found myself drawn to the field of academia, and I had a chance to go get a PhD in public affairs. During my bachelor's degree in history, even though I studied some deep thinkers, it was my connection to my mentor, Dr. Kendra Momon. She was Dr. King at the time. She really introduced me to the deeper levels of Dr. King. And I got a chance to meet Coretta Scott. I got a chance to really delve beyond, almost like I went behind the scenes of the civil rights movement. I got a chance to meet and understand the family dynamics of King versus the public figure. But that really changed my life. That mentor changed my life. And it also allowed for me to learn how Aquinas, Hume, Aristotle, all these deep thinkers was adopted by King in his speeches.
Yes.
But it was when I met you, Dr. Harshaw, that you elevated Howard Thurman to the same level of these thinkers. You allowed for me to see that he wasn't pulling from them. He was pulling from Howard Thurman. And that connection and that I saw in you is really what transformed my view, my questions, my interpretation of King and the civil rights movement, and then your direct experience there. And so to me, I humbly just appreciate this opportunity. I was a part of the Dr. Barber world, and most people remember Dr. Barber, but they don't remember the journey that you were a part of, the civil rights movement. That seemed like distant memory for some people today.
Yes.
But I would love to you to share, how did you get to Howard Thurman? How did that become your soil?
Yeah, well, I'm so honored to be here with you, and meeting you and encountering your essence and who you are and your leadership has been so exciting in my experience. And so I really appreciate the dialogues we've had and what you stand for and what your life means, and the leadership that you provide, not only presently, but that you shall provide as well. I'm a child of the 60s, and so I live, through some of that, and what we now see as history in the past. And I was in Southern California more. I was born in the Midwest, but then, grew up pretty much in Southern California, in Pasadena, Altadena, and Los Angeles. And and I remember the day when my father was sitting at a black and white television set, weeping, which I'd never really seen him do. And he was watching in 1963 the "I Have a Dream" speech. And that had such a profound impact on my life. But when I had an early conversion experience and was part of a youth, a parachurch ministry, when Dr. King was assassinated, we used to listen to his records, and it was, these, the wax, we used to listen to all these, and that is how we were really introduced to his theology. And so he became, in those years for me, a model of ministry. And then many of the ministers in that area that I was relating to or being trained by, I had known him personally, or worked with him or whatever. And then, then I began to study, because I went to seminary in order to get a better focus on what my ministry would be, and was interested in the ministry of engagement. And then I met Jim Lawson. at Holman United Methodist Church, who was significant in the formation of the nonviolent student movement. And he taught a course at Claremont School of Theology on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And we developed a relationship, and I worked for Jim for a while, but also helped to found what at that time was the Martin Luther King Jr. United Methodist Church, even though I was Baptist. This is really really complicated. But Jim wanted me to become a United Methodist, but I wasn't led in that direction, but had a profound opportunity to work with him and meet so many people in the movement through him, as well as my mentor, Dr. Elliott J. Mason Sr., who was pastor at Trinity Baptist Church. And then I got involved in the city celebrations around Dr. King, and worked closely with those who really knew him, like Thomas Kilgore and so many of the people who were really part of the King family and movement and very close to him, and later, Jesse Jackson and so many other people. And I was on the committee there where we celebrated his legacy, every year, and one of the best celebrations in the entire nation. And so he's been a model. I was in college when someone introduced me to Howard Thurman, and I used to read Thurman for devotional readings primarily until I understood all of his life, because I'd never seen a black man with a picture on a book at that time, and the bookstore manager at Point Loma. Nazarene University, now it's called, it was Pasadena Nazarene College, and he used to look out for me for books on philosophy and different things. And he said, I think you'll like this. I don't think the people here will appreciate this book. And so, and that's how I met him, and then learned that my predecessor at Trinity went to school in Oberlin, and so he knew Thurman, and of course Thomas Kilgore knew Thurman, and many of the people in the movement knew him. And so really then over the years got a chance to really understand his theology. And one of my other mentors was Dr. J. Deotis Roberts, who was a black theologian during the era when James Cone, was also treading that path. And so he helped me to understand a lot about Thurman as well.
Well, we are sort of grounding this conversation on this project that you and I, Ann McCall, Christopher Wilson, have sort of come together to try to respond to the moment around leadership, also to the moment around justice, to the moment around what is the beloved community.
Yes.
And the treading of this really tries to land the role of Joshua historically in sort of the Israel historical biblical narrative.
Yes.
His role in sort of freedom. And I'm trying to rest. You named such great pillars. So civil rights and pre-civil rights leaders, black leaders in particular, I'm talking about. Even though many of them talked about freedom for humanity, but we're having this conversation, sort of casting them as Moses.
Yes,
and I would love to get your thoughts around. Me and you were talking about this a little bit, but where would they have envisioned the promised land to be versus us daring to look beyond, or us daring to look beyond the promised land, but you were hinting towards a belief in faith and constitution, court system, law. But what would have been, at least civil rights leaders, what would have been sort of their promised land? This is where we are going.
Yeah, right. And in those days, a promised land was really about overcoming segregation.
Wow.
And having an integrated society and opening the doors to economic empowerment through jobs and upward mobility and possibilities in the American landscape or on the American landscape. And so that's where it was initially. And carrying the desires of our people from centuries before to be treated as human beings, and with capacity and creativity and to be able to extend our understanding that we are created in the image of God. And so that the promised land in those days was to land there, but also to utilize the judicial system to back up the doors that were being opened, because all of that, we have to remember, was forced. Integration didn't just happen. All that was laws being created and forced and challenged. Much of the work that Dr. King and all of those in the movement, which were many people, is all about the judicial system, about creating laws or going back to the Constitution or the Bill of Rights or those sacred documents in order to say, this is what you wrote, now we're going to call you on it. I have a dream speech, about the check that can't be paid and needs to be paid. And now the Promised Land has shifted a bit and isn't as close to that sense, and more related to materialism and capitalism, as if it is the Promised Land, and it is not. And then integration and assimilation for Anglo or white standards is not the Promised Land, whether that's in physical appearance or whether that is a way of life. And in many ways, we have gotten off track, in terms of that. But so if the Supreme Court is not going to back us up anymore because it's so jaded, and if laws across the land and states and state governments are going to continue to play politics, well, then that's a major problem. In terms of the history of the movement, that doesn't mean we stop or any of that. It means that we assess where we are and then utilize whatever we can. And of course, there's always the faith element and the moral fiber, and standing on the history of our predecessors and understanding our ancestors, what they fought for, what they died for, what they strategized for and around, and the power of the black church in that era. It doesn't have the same power today, but we got to take all of that, retrieve the essence of all of that, and then almost in prayer to say, Lord, now what do we do? We still got to, maybe go to the court system. Now, I don't know what's going to happen, because I don't know what justice is today. But so, and the Promised Land is more than economic achievement and then imaging in terms of being on a board or in a position and all that. But yet all of that is vital. So you can't deny it. You can't, can't push it away. But really, it's about what then we understand as a beloved community, and that is being fully human, recognizing other human beings, being in the midst of a community where we can really live out diversity in the proper sense, and embrace what Dr. King and many of them believed about the image of God, that we're all created, that we're all valuable, that everybody has a place. But that beloved community is so important, whatever we call it. We want to look beyond the beloved community and come up with a vernacular that fits for where people are today. But still, we are a village, we are a family, we are a people, we are a community. And so that's going to be the Promised Land, where everyone should have a slice of the pie. And if you're going to still be about democracy, we need a slice of that pie. If you're still going to allow economics to empower people and to provide health care and housing and medicine and educate our children and have scholarships and open doors for education, well, all that's the Promised Land now. That and more. But just the embracing of the human spirit, not only for the country, but for the globe, may save us, as Dr. King said, if we don't make some serious changes theologically, spiritually, with our understanding of philosophy, as he said, in chaos or community, where do we go from here? Well, then we don't know what we're going to be facing, but it probably does not look positive.
But you know what's amazing to me is we have a culture that's reading less. So the literacy, at least from the trends, look like it's going down. King was speaking to an audience that didn't have legal access to education at some levels. So there was a large population that wasn't literate because they weren't legally allowed to be. So I'm not too much lost on hope because literacy is going down. Then you have sort of this idea that King was talking about a secular sort of justice journey. When I listened to him, it sounded like he had both theology and justice, theology and justice were tied together. He didn't rip them apart.
Right.
It wasn't like it was two different human beings.
Yes.
But we are in a culture today where spirituality means less about sort of the faith.
Yes.
And more about well-being, mental well-being, et cetera.
Right.
And this is not to pivot one versus the other, but King really relied heavily on his theology.
Yes.
He relied very heavily on who God is versus who he is.
Right.
He also relied heavily on the sort of the sacred text of this country.
Yes.
Mentioning that same, like he linked all of these together.
Yes.
That he was
right.
I am seeing a decline and wanting to be attached to that part of King's story, to that part of the sort of Moses. I'm a position the civil rights, pre-civil rights as Moses.
Exactly. Right.
But the Joshuas that will be birthed now and have been around and is going to take us to whatever that promised land that we are reimagining.
Yes.
They almost have to re-prop up that theology, that faith element,
right,
that has sort of received sort of the back seat.
Yeah,
right. And I don't know how you listen to King and not hear him hold both of those equally.
Yeah, right. And we have to remember that in that time, we were considered a Christian nation, which most people in this generation would say, well, that's not true. And then you had, through all the documents, this notion of theism. And whether that's true or not, people are going in many different directions in terms of how they find spiritual fervor out of the understanding of supreme being, God, etc. The church, the institutional church, has lost its credibility. And then expressions of Christianity tend to be white supremacist or nationalistic, and then they don't include everybody in it. And now they are politicized to degrees we've never seen historically in the nation that we can track, at least in documents. But yet, for King, it was still the foundation of the black church that was situated in, quote unquote, a Christian nation that affirmed the messages of the biblical texts and the image of Christ and what Christ stood for and what was rooted in Old Testament Judaic history as love God and love your neighbor as yourself. See, all those things were just normal when I grew up. I mean, that was just, that's the way it is. And so now we have to kind of go through the rubbish of all of that, particularly those who were birthed in the Christian community who are now refugees of that because of its hypocrisy, have to now rubbish as the people in Southern California are, after the fire. Let's see, what can we salvage? It's almost the same. It's almost the same reality. There's something to salvage here, but what is it? What's left of that? And for King, of course, it would be the dignity of being a human being, the human personality. That ingredient, and he was a theist, so he did believe in God. He believed in the kingdom of God as proclaimed by Christ, the Sermon on the Mount and its meaning for the relevant society in which he lived. So we still have to retrieve those things, but the language may be different. Then we have to take into consideration that now our platform is no longer the pulpit on a Sunday morning from 11 to 12 or whatever. Now it's all over the place, and it's something different. And so we can't throw out, as you mentioned, the baby in the bathwater. How do we kind of mesh those? Because many of the people who are going to be fighting for justice and fighting the battles of radical love applied and ethics applied are people who still have a sense of faith and still have a moral standard and are still seeking to have some kind of human creativity that represents people coming together and valuing each other. And so that's the only thing that can save us. I mean, because the robot is not going to save us. It can be useful. And money, we already discovered, and people who have a lot, it doesn't change the soul. It doesn't make people good people. It doesn't create lasting friendships. It doesn't bring love. So we already have learned that through history and time and experience. So there's something else that we still have to affirm and say, now, we can't believe in all that's in the society today, but these things we can believe in. That we need to eat and breathe and love, and we need to be in community and work to save people, save the children, preserve life, how to have a family, whatever that family looks like in the 21st century, and then treat each other with dignity. And King really never lost that, even though he embraced all the things we've just have outlined in terms of the hypocrisy of government, politics, democracy, church, statements of faith. He lived through that too, not as drastic as we are living through it now, but yet still held on to there's something better. There is a moral fiber to the human being that can be retrieved or encouraged or built up. And there's still a possibility of a place called the beloved community, where men and women, young and old, Americans and non-Americans, Christians and non-Christians, can live together in peace and in harmony, yet acknowledging what that really means.
There's been rumblings around who was king really.
Yes.
And so there's conversation around papers or the documentation of his life that's going to. But when you listen to King and you listen to his description of the beloved community, he said, I don't encourage you to hate Sam or Bob, but to hate the evil in them. He actually separated those two.
Right.
In order to have a beloved community, you have to be connected to that same person.
Yes.
You have to be connected to that same person.
Yeah.
So he actually separated the act, the intensity, the hatred, from the human being themselves.
Right.
He actually implored you to love that very person.
Right. Right.
And so for me, I'm redirected towards Allport. Allport studied prejudice around the 60s. And Allport said that you take on the identity of the group that you are a part of.
Yes.
And he said that as an individual, you're either part of an in-group or out-group. That could be either race, income, class, gender. The in-group is the group that dominates, that enforces the norm.
Right.
The out-group is the group that has to partake and participate in the norm, even though that doesn't fit their standard.
Yes.
He said, the in-group hates the out-group, and the out-group hates the in-group. And when you zoom into the individual begins to hate the other group, not because the group hates them, but because they've made the group that they're part of, they merged their identity in that group so much that even if they live contrary to the characteristics of their group that they're a membership of, that when you hate that group, it ends up being a reflection on me personally. Wow. So he said, the hatred we see between racial groups or class or gender is not about one group being right and another group being wrong. He said, at the core of that is self-love.
My Lord.
I love myself so much that I have made this group me. So when you hate this group, you hate me.
My Lord.
And so it's on the charge of me to hate you. And so it becomes a journey of self-preservation, self-love, selfishness.
Yes.
King argues the opposite for the beloved community.
Yes.
He would argue that it's the selflessness. So when this narrative comes out about King, I implore the audience, because we're laying out this conversation on Howard Thurman, we're laying out this conversation on King, and we're confident about that.
Right.
And we implore you, on whatever you hear, whether good or bad, that there's something about the work that he was put on earth to do.
Yes.
Versus what you see that was unacceptable.
Yes.
And we implore you to love that human being.
Right. Yes.
And hate whatever you deem to be unacceptable.
Yes.
But we can't lose King in his work, in his body of work.
Amen.
And I wanted to address that at least head on.
Yes.
So that as we go through this conversation,
right.
Just know that Dr. Harshaw and I are talking through this.
Yes, right.
Like we're not jumping over key concepts. King relied very heavily on Howard Thurman, and so we're sort of laying out this conversation on the meditations of the heart.
Yes.
And so we're using sort of Howard Thurman's sort of
Yes.
theology, framework, worldview, view of justice as well to sort of walk this through. But I wanted to just give a chance to talk about that. And Dr. Harshaw, if you have any thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, right. Well, that's brilliant. And it reminds me of the genius of Dr. King in the sense of telling the truth, but also using the model of Christ to apply it ethically and moralistically to the current situation and to what he was living for and through and struggling with during the civil rights movement. And the beauty of that, of course, is you look at Christ, is that it comes from the reflection that all have sinned, fall short of the glory of God. And sometimes the same measuring tool that we use with a famous or celebrity-oriented icon, we don't apply or we don't utilize otherwise. But there are no perfect leaders. And there are no perfect presidents. There never has been. And there are no perfect sages. There are no perfect poets. There are no perfect philosophers, whether it's Plato, Socrates, and on down, in the Greek culture at least, Hellenistic. I mean, so it'd be unfair then to judge Dr. King as if he's not a human being. And many of us who knew about these tapes through our studies and encounters of people around Dr. King. I mean, all this is common knowledge to us, and then some of what the FBI under Hoover was seeking to do to dehumanize him, but also to destroy his image. Has been there. For some people, this would just be more of that for them who never respected him or were afraid of him, and et cetera. But I would push it to say your grandfather was not perfect either.
That's so good.
So you can start with your own family tree,
so good.
but you don't dishonor your father necessarily because he wasn't a perfect human being or your grandfather, nor those who orchestrated what we call the United States of America, Pilgrims on down. I mean, so the perfect one let stand. That's what Jesus did when the woman was caught in adultery, and he said, well, those of you who are perfect, you cast the first stone. And the way the story goes is that they all walked away for, I'm sure, a variety of reasons. So as a Christian, who Dr. King was, and utilizing, like Mahatma Gandhi, the message, the meaning of Christ, then to apply it to social change. You can't take that away from Dr. King. You can't take the benefit of that, the outcome of that, the fruit of that, and what we have inherited because of the life he lived and what he sacrificed for. But also, you can't turn. If you're going to be truthful, you got to be truthful. And it doesn't apply just to one person; it applies to us all. But in the Christian theology, that still was the foundation of this Baptist Christian preacher called Dr. King, is a notion of forgiveness, but also the notion that humans aren't perfect. That we all are flawed, but that doesn't mean we can't work toward community and building nations and building positive. Things for the community to be blessed by, and that's saying now when you come to Howard Thurman, who was and he was in the atmosphere around when Dr. King was being educated, and of course he carried Jesus and the disinherited with him as he preached across the nation and world. That had a tremendous impact. And then I can track with other people who have studied him times when he borrowed from Howard Thurman's sermons or statements, in order to get his message across. But in that book, again, Howard Thurman lifts up the value of Christianity, and almost to say the reason I'm still a Christian is because of the ethic of love that Jesus not only taught but demonstrated, lived, and died for. Because he was struggling also with the deep racism of North American Christianity and how he was going to remain Christian. And he remained Christian, but he had to write that book in 1949 in order to call into question and to indict the church, and particularly in this reflection in the missionary movement. Because that's the heart of positive Christianity, the missionary movement, save the world, the missions all around the world. And it's amazing that he was able to do that and still live,
Wow.
and stay alive. Because if you
Wow.
read it carefully, it's an enormous indictment of organized Christianity
Wow.
because it has failed to conquer the race problem
Wow.
and to deal with it honestly.
Wow.
And so he does that. And so that was an influence upon, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but also, we're all saved by the grace of God according to Christian theology.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
and I don't know anybody who lives outside of that realm.
No.
Because
No. Yeah, but what's amazing to me is how many individuals, I would call them lay persons,
yeah,
think that many of the conversations we're having today are contemporary.
uh-huh.
And you're talking about Howard Thurman wrestling with this in the 40s, and he's
Right.
studying someone to write his book.
Right.
And so it's just amazing to me how this idea of beloved community is something that he was wrestling with
Right.
in his day,
Yes.
that King ended up carrying into his day,
Yes.
and that is almost has a meaningful, relevant narrative. Now, the reason why I say that because
Yes.
I'm in different rooms where there's an assumption that Christianity only resides on one side of the world versus the other,
All right.
or that Christianity is only on one side of the argument versus the other.
Yes.
The justice movement is saturated with pastors, saturated with reverends,
Yes.
saturated with,
Right.
like literally
Right.
saturated with. I mean, you can go on
Yes.
reverends for days,
Right.
in the movement itself, and
Right.
And we only talk about the popular ones.
Yes.
Or faith leaders like Malcolm X. Forget
Yes,
like Christianity.
exactly.
So
Exactly.
the justice movement has really been saturated with faith leaders.
Exactly.
They were not shy about holding true to their faith. So there wasn't
Right.
a separation.
No.
They didn't rip these apart.
Right.
And so
right.
justice to them was also a holy journey.
Yes,
It
yes.
wasn't just
Right,
economic. It wasn't
Yes,
just
yes.
And so I just wanted to just ground sort of our series of conversations around the Joshuas.
Yes.
We're talking about Joshua's. We're seeking out Joshua's.
Yes, yes.
We're here to share the stories and empower Joshua's. But we want Joshua's to know that even though the Moses are no longer carrying the torch,
Yes.
that the reimagining that faith element is still
Yes.
important.
Yes.
But also the soil by which we are sort of walking this journey is still important. And that's Howard
Right.
Thurman, that's Martin Luther King. So again, I'm excited about this conversation. I'm excited about this series. So we're trying to ground this conversation, this series.
Yes.
And we're literally, putting it on the story of Exodus. And for those who don't know, Israelites is in captivity. Moses arrives. Moses, sort of demands, the freedom of the people. Let my people go. Very famous statements.
Yes.
Moses then sort of, parting of this. There's a whole story around that.
Yeah.
But once Moses is no longer in the story,
Yes.
the promised land has yet to be reached,
Right.
and Joshua becomes the sort of the vehicle, the
Yes.
link between freedom, the proclamation of freedom, and reaching it.
Yes.
How should we see King in that story for freedom in America? Help us understand the connection between that story of Moses and Joshua and King himself.
Yeah, right. And we have to understand that in black life in America during slavery and post-slavery, there are these models of survival, avenues of hope, promises of change that came out of the Christian story.
Wow.
And so if you look at the slave songs, in terms of, on the one hand, Moses, let my people go, which is captured in the spiritual, and then Joshua fit the battle of Jericho. So as Martin was growing up and listening to his father and other preachers in not only the South, but this was happening north where you had former slaves, and the songs were the record of those slave songs of how people lived not in lostness and despair, but lived in hope.
Wow.
That if God could do it for the Israelites, for the children of God and children of the covenant, but then he can do it for us.
Wow.
So all of that is really important. And then you have being taught in Sunday schools and preached from pulpits in black culture. And you didn't have many avenues of leadership, but the proclaimer of the gospel, male and female, were those who could have leadership access to the former slaves simply because all the other doors were closed and people weren't being educated, weren't allowed to read. But the preacher, whether he was well read or not, then was able to then have these worship experiences. But the stories were all about stories of miracles and deliverance and hope. And so it's understandable how Dr. King could be in that and internalize that as a child through his own family of multiple ministers, etc. But in the black church. And then as the movement became effective, like no other movement in modern history, and it came from a young PhD preacher who no one expected to do this, and yet carried all of that in his bosom, all of that in his mind, all of that in his real life and family. Then he became, for many of us, the Black Moses. And then theologians began to write on that. And when I was in seminary, there was a journal article that captured that in such a powerful way. So for us, he was the Moses. And so if you understand Moses as deliverance from slavery with the Israelites, with God's miracle-working power, presence, in hand, and then, finishing his task. But then we often overlook the Joshua, and it's so critical. And then so that as I was thinking about writing on leadership as a pastor to other perhaps pastors or leaders in the community or whatever, I just wanted to focus on this aspect of the Joshuas. When Dr. King was assassinated, some people thought automatically that Ralph Abernathy would then fall into that role, but he wasn't Dr. King. And then Jesse Jackson wanted that, but yet he wasn't Dr. King, but he was Jesse. And so as we moved toward, in the church as well as in our society, toward integration into the capitalistic empire, materialism and money, and the status of a class status of having money and power. But then we left, unfortunately, the prophetic kernels of the movement because we're so busy being rich and then aligning that with God's blessing even out of the prosperity movement that still is alive today. So if God blesses you, it means you have multiple cars and clothing and designer clothes. It means you can travel and have cruises. And not that any of that is negative or anything, but now it's shifted toward God's blessing is me having money. And armor bearers that I can pay for, and and have multimedia in the church, and have multiple buses on the campus, and a helicopter and planes, and it's not to call that into judgment, because that can be a form of God's blessing. In order to do the work of preaching the gospel, but what was left unattended is the problem. Who's going to provide a critique of what we're doing if we're going to see capitalism as our goal of the promised land? So to highlight Joshua, number one, he finished the work that Moses started. You see, Moses never entered the promised land. So what about these Joshuas? What about people like Joshua, who's a warrior, who didn't look for the limelight, who led under the radar, but yet accomplished the goal? In strategy as a warrior, but also infused the people of faith with something that became the foundation for their destiny for centuries ahead. You see, and it's really a call for us to take our roles where the void is.
That's right.
Whether you're a teacher, whether you're a cook in the kitchen of a restaurant, whether you're a bus driver taking children to school, whether you're a nurse, whether you're in the courtroom as an attorney, whether you're before a camera doing a movie, whether you're singing a song at the Super Bowl, whatever it is, do your thing and realize that you have an accountability and responsibility to play out your role, because we're still looking to enter, to take advantage of, to expand the promised land and what that means. And we know that it means preserving the protection of human life. It really is about our ancestors and our traditions and what brought us thus far.
Wow.
And it's so important, to understand at least a thought that we wouldn't be where we are today if it had not been for the faith of our predecessors.
Wow.
Because that was their comfort. And so when that group in Atlanta, and some of them were at Fisk and some of them were at Howard University,
Yeah.
but when they began to struggle with what is a way that we can enter American society and not be about violence and hatred.
Wow.
We saw Nat Turner and what it meant.
Wow.
But that's not who we want to be anyway, per se.
Wow.
We don't want to destroy America.
Yeah.
We want to take advantage of America,
Wow.
and we want to be Americans. And so as they struggled with that, within the beloved community notion became advantageous to apply that because they really were Christians.
Wow.
That's the other thing. They did believe, as Israel did, in the kingdom of God, and then it was redefined with Jesus and the followers of Jesus. And then Martin Luther King Jr. embraced that, internalized that with the other preachers and pastors, men and women, who became the foundation of that movement. They believed in prayer in demonstrations. They sang hymns in the gatherings. They sang "We Shall Overcome." They lifted up the National Negro Anthem. And if you go through that, it's Christian thought all through it.
That's so good.
And prayer in the midst of it,
So good.
and the sense that we are Americans
Wow.
in that also. But yet we're not going to forget our homeland, Africa,
Yes.
because we're Africans
That's
also.
so good. That's so good.
And so all of that really provided a safe way to achieve what we have achieved. If it had been a nationalistic, violent movement, it would have been annihilated.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
Because our predecessors would have been murdered.
That's right.
And already lynchings took
That's
place, and bombings and threats,
That's right.
and the attack on the black body,
That's right.
and particularly the black male.
That's right.
All that is
That's right.
it's and if you look at the book that the video that captures that in terms of what slavery and codes and Jim Crow look like and all of that, you understand the connection. Yeah. But what has liberated us is our faith.
Wow.
And the fact that we honor our enemy, and that's what that's what a genius was in the movement, is to take the teaching of Jesus, the ethic of Jesus, and apply it. And we're not here to hate white people.
Man, that's so good.
But we're here to redeem them. And the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, part of the mission was to redeem the soul of America.
Wow.
Well, all that comes right out of Christ. It comes out of Christian, tradition. So in this generation, when people don't want to be Christians, associate with the church, that's up to them. They have freedom to do that. Yeah. But you can't forget what brought you where you are, because most likely you wouldn't have had education or had opportunities or sit in the roles of power you're sitting now if it had not been for the people who actually believed that.
That's right.
And prayed for that.
That's right.
And many of them died for that. That gave you the ticket.
Wow.
To the parade or to the game
Wow.
or got you in the club or whatever it is.
It literally, the church literally was the school at one point. And to me, with the Rosenwald schools, et cetera, literally the church was the actual physical school.
Right.
And so our goal is really just to recenter actual history.
Yes.
Not even like
right.
We're not even like making up.
It's already there.
We just want to recenter sort of the role of the black church experience.
Right.
We want to keep Reverend in front of Martin King.
Yes.
We just want to keep
because that's who he was historically.
Yeah, we want to keep that. We want to keep that there. But also, we want to lay it on the framework that was embedded in these hymns. I'm glad that you even touched that. It's embedded in the hymns. It's embedded in sort of we used to have testimony service.
Yes.
Testimony service. That journey was this understanding that Easter requires Good Friday.
Right.
Like they're the same.
Exactly.
And that just came from, I just took that literally from Dr. King's speech. So that's something that he actually said.
Right.
You can't have the beloved community without Good Friday.
Exactly.
And so it's this narrative that devoids that movement from the soul that kept it.
Right.
That allowed for it to be resilient.
Exactly.
If I'm living for your grandchildren, Dr. Harshaw.
Yes.
Then my immediate pleasures
are
not as important as the journey and the progress
Yes.
that I make for that grandchild.
Right.
But if it's about me,
Yes.
then the cross that I'm willing to hold is much lighter.
Yes, exactly. Right.
The journey I'm willing to hold is much lighter.
Right.
And so the blood
Exactly.
community is really about a communal
Exactly.
aspect.
Yes.
Rather than just
Right.
Terrance being well.
Right.
Terrance having a good place to live. Terrance having a good education.
Right.
It has to have something that leads into
Right.
a much larger narrative.
And it goes all the way back to the continent.
Oh, cool.
And the village
That's right.
concept, it takes a village.
That's right.
And of course, that's African,
That's right.
basically.
That's right.
And you can go through proverbs and
That's right.
philosophies that Africans believed in, the community.
That's right.
So it even predates our understanding
Wow.
of Christianity. So
Wow.
but it's so important to know you're accountable to a group of people.
That's right.
And you're not here by yourself, but you're going to leave something, and you're going to provide a path for those who follow.
Wow.
I mean, you know, and the problem with prosperity, when it's misunderstood, because there's prosperity notions in the text, in the Old and New Testament, but you know, so God does provide things for us.
Yes.
But when that's an aberration of thinking that's all it's about,
Wow.
well, then it really fights against community. It's always about me, and then there's nothing left in the shambles. You know, I mean, the ashes of that. I mean, there's nothing left.
Wow.
And the problem of not having a faith is that you don't have the fortitude to keep fighting.
Wow.
And some people say that the present generation isn't strong internally. They can't take much. And you look at, you know, I mean, people get upset about there's so many minute things that just make no sense to an older generation who had nothing compared to what we have. But the fortitude isn't there, you know, and the suicide rate is beyond you know, in America, and particularly people of color, than it's ever been in history. And why is that? When you have everything you want at your fingertips, every room you walk through your house has a TV in it, and you have access to touch the world. You're talking to people all over the place. You're putting your picture all over the world. That's how you find connections, even.
Yes.
And then, you know, everybody in the house has a car. There's not enough space in the garage for all the cars. And it's almost like, and what's your problem now?
And I just, to me, I just appreciate you grounding us in sort of what is the beloved community for the Moses of the civil rights movement. And then how we can possibly dream of something beyond what they had in mind as Joshua's.
Yes.
So our audiences are those Joshuas out there that's not trying to be Dr. King.
No, be
not
you.
trying to be Moses.
Joshua. Be yourself.
Yes. We're not talking to those who are trying to recreate that one hero. We're talking to the Joshuas who are in between the journey,
who are making a difference.
Yes.
Who are picking up the struggle.
Yes.
Who are raising children, and they're the only parent that's responsible. You know, who connecting dots.
That's right.
Making it happen for people who are still trying to find themselves.
That's
and
right.
others whose lives have been redefined by addictions.
That's right.
Who are keeping the household together. Those are the Joshuas as well. Those who clean the church before service and afterwards. Who people don't even speak to often because they had the big celebration day and all the praise and all the wonderful music and you know, the heart-wrenching sermon, and you walk right past the person who has a clean up after you. Those are the Joshuas too.
Wow.
The one who turns the heat on before you get to a cold building.
That's right.
And the one who pushes a button so that your message can go on radio or on media or Instagram or Facebook. You know, but some of them you don't even know their names, but they're the Joshuas who keep your message going. Yeah, they keep showing up.
That's powerful.
But you're too busy when you leave the church to go to the dinner that's been prepared for you, or you prepared for yourself. You know, because they don't have a title.
That's right.
You know, the bus drivers who protect our children, they may not have a title. Some of them haven't had a strong education, but they're the ones who parents depend on to get the children from point A to point B and protect their lives. And they do that often. But
you're running to a series, just a saturated audience of leadership books, leadership tapes and workshops that try to talk just to Martin Luther King.
Yes.
But you very rarely find leadership podcasts, conversation books that speak to Joshua's.
No.
And that's what we're trying to do.
Right. Yeah.
In a season where people are feeling the intensity of the moment, they're feeling the intensity of the economy, they're feeling the intensity of education,
Right.
they're feeling the weight of the time.
Right.
Our goal, our desire is to speak to those Joshuas.
Yes. Yeah. The whole team. Yeah. Not just the
That's right.
3-point shooters.
That's right.
And
That's
not,
right. That's right.
Not just the fullbacks
That's
or
right.
halfbacks.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah,
That's
or the
right.
quarterback.
That's right.
But
That's right.
but as we
That's right.
see every day,
That's right.
but the team
That's right.
wins
That's right.
the series and not just one individual.
That's right.
And then Dr. King was not by himself.
Wow.
He there are so many men and women, lay people in the church, young people, children and teenagers, young adults, and other unknown preachers of the gospel.
Yeah.
Who made that movement for what it was. Well, they're Joshua's, but because we worship celebrity,
That's right.
we look past, and all that is related to capitalism as well, because those people make money and make money for people.
That's right.
So they're presented to us as the essence of basketball, football, tennis, soccer, the swimming team, the Olympics, you name it. And we enjoy that and we applaud talent wherever it comes. But often there's the Joshuas.
That's right.
There's the praying grandmother for some singer who now has tours all over the world, but you may not hear about the praying grandmother that prayed her through stuff when she couldn't be on that stage.
That's right.
Yeah, but she's a Joshua.
Wow.
But we still applaud people who have talent now.
No,
I mean you can't take away from unique human beings who are creative and extremely gifted.
That's
because that's beautiful.
Well, I just to me, I remember running for mayor twice.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember entering communities, especially communities who feel that they don't have access to all the resources that other parts of the same city experiences. They were looking for a Moses.
Yes.
And I said, in the title, public servant.
Right.
That description fits more of a Joshua than it does.
Exactly. Yeah.
But there's an appetite that I hope that we are able to build in communities that are feeling the strain of the time.
Yes.
That you could do a lot. You could reach the destination with a Joshua.
Oh, yes. You really can.
And not having Moses.
Right.
And so I just would love for people to recenter how significant that leadership style is in moments where you're trying to get to a destination. Yeah. And I want to challenge us and our listeners to imagine even beyond the beloved community and to see the Joshua role in reaching that beloved community. So let's delve into Howard Thurman's Meditations of the Heart and explore how sort of his contemplations can inspire us to expand this vision of the beloved community. So Thurman wrote, the movement of the Spirit of God in the hearts of men often calls them to act against the spirit of their times.
Yes.
The movement of the Spirit of God in the hearts of men often calls them to act against the spirit of their times. Perhaps moving beyond the beloved community means daring to act against the current paradigms, even those we've revered. Now, that's a powerful quote. You almost could cut and paste it today.
Yes. Right.
But like, how should we understand the spirit of a time?
Yes. Right.
Like, we can understand, like, acts. Like, certain things were cut, or certain things were removed, or certain things were not permitted. But how do you touch the spirit of a time?
Yes, right. And that's such a powerful statement on the part of Dr. Thurman. And the way I would approach that is, first of all, it's him understanding what he would call his idiom. It's almost like his clothing, his dressing, his style, his presentation, his brand.
Wow.
In today's world, we would say that wasn't popular then. And then he would speak to men and women and not just man. Of course, we can't change what he wrote.
That's right.
But today he would say person to be inclusive. But it was so important for us to own ourselves, to embrace ourselves, and to be ourselves. That's part of Joshua as well. That he did make the mistake of trying to be Moses. We never would have heard of him if he had. So he totally embraced, I'm Joshua.
Yeah.
I worked with Moses.
Wow.
I admire Moses.
Wow.
He was my mentor.
Wow.
But at the end of the day, I'm not Moses.
Wow.
But I can be Joshua, you see. And so being in your idiom and stepping into that in history and time, I think was really important for him. His idiom was black.
Wow.
And he recognized as, his skin color early.
Yes.
He couldn't pass or anything like that.
That's right.
And he was saddled with that. And he had the choice either to hate that, like the world or the American society hates it, or to love it and to embrace it and to enhance it and to develop it. And so he didn't live his life trying to be lighter in colorism, or he didn't try to pass for anything.
Yeah.
He really embraced, I'm a black Howard Thurman.
Wow.
And my mother and my grandmother in particular, my church, has given me that also. My father.
Wow.
So he totally embraced that. And then, he believed in that. Then you discover not only yourself, but you discover others. And then you discover what makes you live and what makes you come alive, as he would say, where the passion of your person are intertwined, and you live that out, but without the applause of the world. See, and so we're so caught up into having that affirmation and everybody, performing in stadiums and having everybody clap for us, and the whole church has to say amen at our sermons and our words, and you can go down the list of being on the cover of the magazine and all that. The problem is that you don't deny that, because that's called success. But the issue is that that's not your heart. That's not where your strength comes from. So if you're going to stand in your place and in your idiom, it will never, if it's truthful, be popular always with the movement of society. And so it takes courage. And Paul Tillich said it in a book, one of the theologians that were popular in the 20th century, the courage to be. But Howard Thurman, along with Martin Luther King, along with others that we can identify in our history, decided that they were going to just be. And then the world has to catch up with that. So it means that the spirit of the times is what is comfortable for people, what the crowd is doing, what gives you applause, what gives you superficial false affirmation, the problem with that. But if you start getting deeper into who you are, your idiom, and your passion, well, a lot of times the crowd will not appreciate you while you're still living that out. They may come back and retrieve it, and hopefully before you die, but some may have to wait till you're dead to do it, that Moses is dead. And that's what God said, Yahweh said to Joshua, and that helped Joshua, because as long as Moses was alive, Joshua was not going to live to his full potential. But when the Lord said, hey boy, Moses is dead, and he said it like 2 or 3 times, and he kept telling him, be strong, because he was young, but also he loved Moses. Moses is dead. Just like when our mothers and fathers leave us, and after a while it's like, who's going to run this family?
I've actually heard people question, who's our king? Who's our Martin Luther King? Where's and like almost as if there's no full understanding that he's dead.
Yeah, Martin's dead.
And
there's only one.
Yes. And so like there's that same sort of cadence is needed for people today who are waiting for.
He's not coming.
Yeah.
It's almost, he's for Santa Claus to come through the chimney.
Yes.
Now, he's coming. He ain't coming through the chimney.
No. And,
no.
And also there's an element of his time that created that moment. And that time is no longer here.
Right.
But there's a time now that's required for the same.
Right. And the same needs for humanity, the same God that created Martin and many others. It's the creativity is there, but we gotta embrace it, and that's what Thurman is saying. I mean, you really have to embrace that, and rarely will you get applause all the time, 100%. From the world in which you live, because your very essence is calling that world into question. You know, when Quest was talking about, some of the way he thinks about music and the way he wanted to pick up what was happening in the '60s in terms of the music and what he produced as a documentary. And now he's working on another documentary on Sly Stone. And he said, you don't really know him. You thought you knew him. But a lot of these musicians, he said, and these phenomenal people, you don't really know them. And you talk about their struggles. You denounce them. You judge them harshly. But to balance a story, you also need to know their backstory, and you need to know what they have gone through. But these are geniuses that come and go. And after we enjoy what they produce, we spend the rest of the time denouncing them, downing them. And every one of them that you can name, male and female. We spend so much time criticizing them and this and that, and yet their music is giving life to us, and will give life to people after we're dead and gone. But yet you don't know their story. You see, and that's the problem. And so, there's not going to be another Martin Luther King, but you be who you need to be for today's leadership, and to hold you prisoner to say, well, you're not like Martin, so how can you be mayor if you're not like Martin? No, I'm glad I'm not like Martin. I'm Terrance. That's my name. And what created him didn't create me in the same way. But I'm here now.
And also, I think there's ebbs and flows of appetite for types of leadership.
Exactly.
And there's a reason why Ella Baker was very successful in her time. We are in a moment where decentralized servant leadership
is the order of the day, and it needs to be. The idea of people want a level of autonomy. And they also would like to seek direction. A dominant leader, hierarchical journey is not working. That's why people are working from home. They're working remote. They don't want this sort of. So if we're looking at beloved community and we're looking at Joshua's, and we want to apply some sort of new innovation around it, we're seeing an audience, a country, a world, a society that's looking for a different type of guidance. Amen.
They have access to all the information. They don't need your degree.
No.
They don't need a degree. So it's a different type of leader. So what if we consider the beloved community as the foundation? What innovations can we build atop of that? Like, how can we address the complexities of today's world? Globalization. We're watching a meeting of global leaders impact our economy. Like literally in the same day, the same hour, the same second. Before, we wouldn't even known about those meetings.
Exactly.
We wouldn't even known about a meeting between our president and another president. Now it impacts our economy immediately. Then you're talking about technology. The kids that are growing up to be the next Joshuas will live in virtual community and die in virtual community. At a higher volume than they live and experience in-person community. So King wasn't even touching that audience. You're talking about a technology, a way of engaging, a way of arranging relationships. That's totally different.
Exactly.
That requires a different Joshua. That requires a totally different human being that can walk you through that wilderness. That can understand the complexities and the mental wellness and all the things that come a part of that journey. And even though technology connects you to people, there's also isolation. And it takes some. And then the environmental crisis. I mean, we're looking at California. That's your backyard. How can we apply innovation on that beloved community that Dr. King just probably couldn't even foresee?
And what comes to mind for me is something that Martin Buber in his book I Am Thou that King used to quote really laid the foundation for, and that is meeting. Meeting humans, and Howard Thurman said, search for the common ground. And so there will be silos and cell groups and you know and so it's not the same, and people aren't looking for you to be the one dominant carrier of the message. And
Yes.
those days are over. It's
Yes.
more, you know, and people will look shorter periods of time to hear what you have to say anyway. If you don't say it fast, they're not listening.
Wow.
Yeah, because that's how they and that's how they live.
Wow.
You know, and it's not personal. It's
Yeah.
just the way to say it. Say it
Yeah.
fast. I ain't got time.
Yep.
So
Yep.
who are you? What
That's
you
right.
about? Because I'm moving on to this other thing.
That's right.
So it means that the method that you use for leadership has to shift and change with it, and so you can be an influencer now. I mean, and not for this media success-oriented capitalistic way. I'm not talking so you can sit on Good Morning America or Today's Show and talk. I'm not that you won't, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about in your circle of influence, the common ground and meeting people, which means also that you're still going to be a student.
That's right.
Because there's a lot you got to learn. You got to learn the language. You have to learn what makes people tick.
That's right.
And so you're not the answer to bring answers to people on the top down, and you're coming to give a speech and because they don't know anything until you give that speech.
That's right.
But that's the world Dr. King lived in, and that's okay because he embraces the world fully.
That's right.
Our world is going to, how do you get a common ground with China and Africa and South America and Europe, and I mean, what's the common ground? That's the fear today. If you're starting to demolish bridges with other countries, then that's really dangerous.
Yeah.
But you know, and then calling people, you know, enemies who aren't you.
Yeah.
I mean that takes us back centuries, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
But so there has to be a way for dialogue and conversation and learning, and then and become an influencer. But not for necessarily economic gain, but it may come with it, but more for the quality of nourishing human dialogue and community, and the dynamic of meeting people. So for me, it's a glass half full, and so I don't hang out with the people of my generation who are talking about the way it was, and I remember when. But it's not like, I mean, I mean, I'm excited about the future. I see it as a great horizon for wonderful opportunities, and as much as I know that's wrong with media, it's such an exciting tool to influence people for good. And so they say, well, I never met Dr. King, and I can send them right, but it's touching my phone. Listen to this speech. And I can say I have a dream, or I can say the last speech he gave, the mountaintop, or I could. There's all kind of radio talks he had, or whatever. So it's uncomfortable to have to teach people who you think ought to know about Dr. King.
Wow.
And then start talking about it, and that's fine. Maybe one conversation, get over it, face it. They don't know who Dr. King was, but you can introduce through education and exposure, and you can actually bring this stuff to them.
Yeah, you know what's amazing? I ran into a friend of mine who had a speech. He gave it to one of his technologists. AI produced a podcast where two people were talking back and forth about his speech, adding new thought, new insight, new everything. From his speech, they produced. And so you're thinking about King.
Yes.
You can almost create, I know it's possible. There's a gentleman right here in the city that we're in who created a tool where you could create new thought as if you were King. So you could create a book.
Oh, come on. Yeah, that's amazing.
So he scrapes the internet.
Yes.
All the words, all the language, and he could create a new thought to have King contribute to the future of AI and hatred, you know, and it would be something that he never said before, we never read before,
right.
But it would be all of his thoughts and ideas, compressed into a way of thought that can produce new thought. It's absolutely fascinating.
Yes.
But you can use the Moses of the day in a new way, but you can also empower and encourage the Joshuas in a different way,
exactly,
in a new way that we didn't have before. And I want to really sort of close this out with this idea that this innovation, this new idea is causing us to rethink leadership.
Yes.
If it's not about me being the ultimate smart person in the room,
Right.
or me having the only access to whatever this resource is.
Yes.
Leadership must be something different. It must,
Right.
it must be something different.
Yes.
It will force you to be a servant
Yes.
because it's not about you dominating. That was actually about you
Right.
serving.
Yes.
That allows people to follow you.
Right.
What about rethinking leadership, moving from this sort of hierarchy to your Ella Baker that me and you talked about before?
Yes.
How should we center Howard Thurman's emphasis on inner spiritual authority
Yes.
over sort of this external control and leadership? And then we'll close with this.
Yeah. For Howard Thurman, and it gets back to the notion of the idiom, the issue that we are creators and we're created for creativity. That sounds kind of jumbled up, but it's true.
Wow.
And this is what. So part of it is finding that inward place, like he refers to in his writings and Meditation of the Heart, this island within yourself or whatever.
Wow. Yep.
But really to find that inner place where you are linked with destiny, the sense of who you truly are, your good self, not your false self. As Thomas Merton made that distinction, the false self that many people live with, and the true self. And so life is about discovering your true self. But out of that, you've got to find your foundation. And that centering. And for some, it will be meditation. For others, it'll be a run in the park in the morning. For others, it will be jumping into a pool of water. For some, it'll be finding a book to read. For others, and the list goes on and on. But you have to find that in order to contribute to the community in terms of why we all are gifted to be creators for this time in the 21st century. That's part of the design. You're not an accident. You're here for a purpose. And to embrace that and to live that out, because that's going to be your protection when you're hated on. And when the world doesn't applaud you. And yet you got to continue to write your poem. Continue the lyrics of your song. You still got to get dressed for your performance.
That's right.
You still got to do your thing, but you won't always have lovers around you.
That's good.
But you will love yourself and know that there's a greater love beyond yourself that put that love in yourself. And then you start there, and then I think the rest of it is discovery. I think it's a path. I think it's a journey of discovering, and that's the beauty of education, of course. That we're still learning ourselves. We're learning to be in partnership with another. We're learning the partnership of marriage and friendship and community and committed to a common cause. But out of that, the light will come. That's another way of putting Howard Thurman's writing and living, not just writing, but living into perspective.
That's a good. But sometimes I think that this journey is about how much knowledge you can accumulate. But King lived, Joshua lived, Moses lived, and so the call to action is to live. So to our listeners, we pose this question: what does a world beyond the beloved community look like to you? Now, we talked about it, we've wrestled with some of the principles, and how can you contribute to its creation? Now, we want you to engage with us on this journey. We're excited. You can see why we're excited. We want you to share your visions, your dreams, and even the ones that surpass the highest aspirations that we've held so far. And so with that, this conversation is just beginning. Next time, we'll delve a little deeper into reimagining spirituality's role in shaping our future. Until then, keep pushing the boundaries of your imagination. Together, we're crafting a new narrative, the Joshua Project. Thank you.